What happens when Hollywood's toughest fighter steps into the lion's den? Not a boxing ring, this time, but the sharp tongues of daytime television. When Sylvester Stallone joined The View for what should have been a friendly chat, no one expected the gloves to come off, on both sides. This is the story of how respect turned into ridicule and how Stallone stood tall when it mattered most. Stay tuned, because you won't believe how one of the most respected icons of cinema walked into what felt like an ambush, kept his composure longer than anyone thought possible, and then delivered a knockout blow you'll never forget. The studio of The View buzzed louder than usual that morning. Producers scurried about, final touches were made to the set, and the crowd filled the seats with an excited hum. All eyes would soon be on Sylvester Stallone, the man who embodied perseverance through his roles as Rocky and Rambo, now 77 and still radiating the grit of a fighter. As the cameras started rolling, Stallone strode onto the stage in a tailored gray suit, his shoulders broad, his trademark half-smile intact. He looked every bit the movie star, dignified yet approachable. The applause was warm, but beneath the surface, there was a tension he couldn't quite place. Years of surviving Hollywood had taught him to trust those instincts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Joy Behar announced, her voice dripping with a sweetness that sounded rehearsed. "We're joined today by the man who's been punching his way into our hearts since the 70s, Sylvester Stallone." "Thanks for having me," Stallone replied, his gravelly voice filling the studio, deep and unshaken. He settled into the guest chair, greeting the other hosts with polite nods. But already he caught it, the gleam in Joy's eye, the kind that told him this wouldn't just be about his latest movie. Joy leaned in, flashing her notorious smirk. "So, Sly, do you mind if I call you Sly? You've been making these big, loud, testosterone-fueled movies for, 50 years now? Don't you ever wonder if maybe the world's moved on from all that macho stuff?" The audience chuckled awkwardly. Stallone chuckled too, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned back and crossed one leg over the other. "Well, Joy," he said evenly, "the world might move fast, but there's always room for stories about resilience and fighting for something you believe in. That's what my movies are about." Joy tilted her head, unconvinced. "Fighting, sure, but you're not worried those stories, you know, glorify violence? Give young guys the wrong idea? That they can just punch their way out of problems?" Stallone clasped his hands together and kept his tone calm. "Rocky didn't win because he threw punches, Joy. He won because he got back up every time he was knocked down. That's not about violence. That's about spirit." Across the table, another host, Sonny Hostin, chimed in. "But isn't it also a little dated, Sylvester? The whole hyper-masculine, muscle-bound hero thing? Maybe today's audience wants something, I don't know, more sophisticated?" "More sophisticated," Stallone repeated softly. His jaw tightened, but his smile didn't falter. "There's nothing more sophisticated than the human will to overcome." Joy leaned back, unimpressed. "But really, aren't you just playing the same guy over and over? Rocky, Rambo, Barney Ross. They all kind of blend together, don't they? Different costumes, same angry fists." The jab landed harder than it sounded. Stallone uncrossed his legs and placed his hands firmly on his knees. "I've told stories about underdogs, soldiers, fathers, men at the edge of their limits. If they all share grit, it's because grit is universal." The studio audience clapped lightly at that, but Joy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, Sly. Don't make it sound like Shakespeare. You're throwing punches and blowing things up. You're a good-looking guy who lucked into one big movie and just kept coasting." The other hosts exchanged glances. The remarks seemed to suck the air out of the room, but Stallone's response was calm, too calm. "You're entitled to your opinion, Joy," he said slowly, his gaze fixed on hers. "But I worked for every inch of my career. Nobody handed me anything. I wrote Rocky when I had nothing, and it changed my life because I refused to quit." That only emboldened her. Yeah, we've heard the bus station stories," she scoffed. "But come on, it's been decades. Maybe it's time to hang up the gloves and stop pretending these movies are doing anything but cashing in on nostalgia." Stallone gave her a long, steady look. For now, he held his composure. He sat back in his chair, arms folded, and let her words hang there. But the studio could already feel it. Under that calm exterior, a storm was gathering, and it was only just beginning. By the time the commercial break ended and cameras rolled again, you could cut the tension in the studio with a knife. Stallone sat in his chair, hands clasped, that famous jawline set tight. But his eyes, dark, sharp, didn't leave Joy for a second. Joy, for her part, seemed emboldened. The audience could feel it. She smelled blood in the water, and she was going to take her shot. "So, Sly," she began, flipping through her notes as if she didn't already have her barbs memorized. "Let's talk about your acting. I mean, do you even consider yourself an actor? Or are you just playing yourself over and over again?" Stallone raised an eyebrow, his lips curled into a faint smile. "Well, Joy, I've been nominated for Oscars. Written, directed, produced, starred. That usually counts as acting in most circles." Joy chuckled coldly. "Oh, please. That first nomination was 1976. You were young and hungry. But now, let's be honest. You're just milking the same character over and over because it's safe. Rocky, Rambo, whatever muscle-bound guy comes next. You don't actually challenge yourself, do you?" That drew murmurs from the audience. Stallone shifted slightly in his chair and leaned forward, his voice even. "Every film I make is a challenge, physically, emotionally. You don't know what it takes to carry a story, to stand there and give everything you've got to make something that moves people. But go ahead, Joy. Tell me what my job is. You seem to know it better than I do." Whoopi tried to step in, her voice cutting softly through the tension. "Maybe we can talk about the new movie, Sly. Tell us what inspired it." But Joy waved her off. "Oh no, Whoopi, let's not let him off that easy. Let's really get into it." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What's it like knowing the only reason people still pay to see you is because they feel sorry for you? That they're clinging to nostalgia because the real Sylvester Stallone, the fighter, the icon, is long gone? What's it like knowing your best work was 50 years ago?" The words hit like a gut punch. Even the audience gasped. For a long, uncomfortable moment, Stallone didn't speak. His hands tightened on his knees. Then he let out a short, sharp laugh that carried no humor. "You know what, Joy?" he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. But you've got no idea what you're talking about. You think just because you've got a camera and an audience, you can sit there and tear people apart? People who've actually built something? People who've worked their whole lives to create something meaningful? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me." Joy scoffed. "Oh, sure, Sly. Poor little underdog. Still fighting the good fight, huh? Still trying to prove you're more than a pair of biceps. But let me tell you something. Nobody buys it anymore. The world's moved on. You're a relic." At that, Stallone's posture changed. He straightened in his chair, shoulders squared, and his voice, though still calm, carried an unmistakable steel. "A relic," he repeated. "You think because the world changes, everything that came before means nothing? You think because people want something new, the old stories stop mattering? Those stories still inspire people, Joy. They still matter. And I still matter, whether you like it or not." Sonny Hostin spoke up timidly, as though trying to savor the segment. "I think what Joy's saying, and I could be wrong, is that maybe it's time for new voices to step forward, and for legends like yourself to step aside." Stallone turned his gaze on her, and she visibly flinched. "I don't take up space that isn't mine," he said firmly. "There's room for everyone, if they're willing to fight for it. I fought for mine. Nobody handed me a damn thing, and I'm not going to apologize for still being here." Joy laughed again, sharp, mocking. "Oh, we know you fought. You've told that sob story so many times it's practically a bedtime tale by now. But you know what I think? I think you're terrified of letting go, of fading away, of becoming irrelevant. That's why you keep churning out the same old junk. It's sad, really." The audience murmured again, some gasps, some uncomfortable shuffling. Even the producers behind the cameras looked nervous now. But Stallone simply stared at her, unblinking. He leaned forward slightly, his massive hands folded together, and spoke in a low growl that somehow filled the entire studio. "You want to talk about sad, Joy? You sit here every day tearing down people who are out there actually doing something, actually living. You call it journalism. You call it holding people accountable. But it's not. It's bitterness. It's jealousy dressed up as insight. You've built your career out of mocking others. Congratulations. Joy's face flushed crimson, but she smiled that same cold, tight smile. Oh, look at the tough guy getting all sensitive. Did I strike a nerve, Sly? Does the truth hurt? Stallone didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on hers, dark and steady. Truth, he said quietly. You wouldn't recognize the truth if it sat in this chair and shook your hand. The audience erupted, some in applause, others in awkward laughter. The air was charged now, electric. Everyone could feel it. The storm was coming. And Sylvester Stallone, the fighter who'd been knocked down more times than anyone could count, wasn't about to let Joy land the final punch. Not yet. The cameras came back from another short break, and this time, you could practically hear the silence in the studio. Nobody dared to even cough. Even the audience, normally rowdy and enthusiastic, sat still, eyes locked on the simmering storm between Stallone and Joy Behar. Joy shuffled her papers, a nervous tick masked as professionalism, and leaned forward with a smile that looked more like a predator baring its teeth. So, Sylvester, she began, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, before the break you accused me of, what was it? Bitterness? Jealousy? I suppose it's easier for you to believe that than to face the fact that maybe, just maybe, your movies really are as shallow as people say. Stallone's lips twitched, but he stayed seated, his massive frame rigid with controlled tension. My movies, he said slowly, are about giving people hope, something to hold on to when life is beating them down. If you can't see that, Joy, that's not my problem. That's yours. But Joy was just getting started. She pressed on, her tone sharp now, her words designed to cut. Hope? She snorted. Come on, Sly. Your movies are about sweaty men beating each other to a pulp while a flag waves in the background. You've spent 50 years teaching boys that a clenched fist is the answer to every problem. And you call that hope? The words hung in the air like smoke. Even Whoopi, who usually had something to say to cool things down, sat frozen, her lips pressed into a thin line. Stallone exhaled through his nose. You could see the veins in his forearm bulge slightly as he clenched his hands together. You know what, Joy, he said finally. When you've stood in my shoes, when you've faced rejection after rejection, when you've written your own script by hand because nobody believed in you, when you've had to sell your dog to afford food and then fought your way back, then maybe you can sit there and judge me. Until then, you're just another voice in the cheap seats. There was a smattering of applause from the audience, but Joy quickly waved it down, as though she were still in control of the room. Oh yes, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We've all heard the I sold my dog story. It's practically part of your brand now. But here's the thing, Sylvester. One sad story from 50 years ago doesn't excuse a lifetime of glorifying violence and mediocrity. That one landed. You could see it in Stallone's eyes, the flash of hurt that quickly turned to fire. Glorifying mediocrity? He repeated, his voice low, steady, dangerous. You think it's mediocrity to fight for every inch? To stand up when everyone tells you to stay down? To create something that outlives you? Something that inspires millions of people who've been told they're not good enough? That's not mediocrity, Joy. That's called making a difference. But Joy wasn't finished. She leaned forward now, her smile gone, her tone hard. And yet, she hissed, what do you really have to show for it? A bunch of meathead fans who think they're Rocky? A string of sequels nobody asked for? A legacy of broken noses and bruised egos? The audience murmured. The other co-hosts shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing that this was spiraling into dangerous territory. But Joy pressed on anyway. You know what I see when I look at you, Sylvester? She said, her voice rising. I see a man who got lucky once and has been riding that one lucky punch ever since. You're not a fighter, you're a fraud, a mascot for outdated masculinity, a joke. That was it. The word hung in the air. Joke, like a hammer blow. For the first time since he sat down, Stallone's composure cracked. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locked on hers, dark and blazing. His voice, when it came, was quiet but carried across the entire studio. "You want to call me a joke?" he asked. "Fine. You call me whatever makes you feel better about yourself. But let me tell you something, Joy. The only joke here is the idea that you think you're a journalist. You're not. You're a heckler with a camera." The audience gasped. Joy's face turned bright red, but Stallone didn't stop. "You sit here every day tearing down people who've actually accomplished something, who've actually built something, and you mock, you belittle, you humiliate, and then you hide behind words like journalism and accountability. But you're not holding anyone accountable. You're just feeding on other people's pain." He straightened, his breathing heavier now, his chest rising and falling as he tried to calm himself. But the fire in his eyes burned brighter than ever. "You think you know me? You think you understand my life? You don't know the first damn thing about what it takes to keep getting back up after life knocks you down. All you know how to do is sit here, safe behind your little desk, and throw stones at people who've actually lived." Joy tried to interrupt, but her words faltered under the weight of his voice. "I've spent my life building people up," he continued, his voice growing louder now, almost booming, "giving them something to believe in. And all you've done is tear people down. You want to talk about legacy? That's yours. That's who you are. A destroyer." For a moment, the studio was silent. Even the camera seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to zoom in on Stallone's blazing glare or Joy's stunned face. Finally, Joy spoke, her voice shaky but defiant. "If you can't handle a few tough questions, Sylvester, maybe you should stay off TV. Maybe you should just fade away quietly and stop embarrassing yourself." Stallone let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head slowly. "No, Joy, you don't get to tell me when I'm done. You don't get to decide when I stop fighting. And you sure as hell don't get to sit there and judge me like you're better than me." He leaned forward one last time, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're not better than me, Joy. You're just louder. But loud doesn't make you right." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. And though he stayed in his seat for now, it was clear. Sylvester Stallone was one more insult away from unleashing the full weight of his fury and walking out for good. The air in the studio had become thick, almost unbreathable. Every member of the crew stood frozen, unsure of whether to keep filming or cut to commercial. Even the cameras seemed hesitant to move, as though afraid to provoke the storm sitting across from Joy Behar. Stallone sat there, his massive hands clasped together, his knuckles white. His eyes burned holes through Joy as she leaned back in her boudoir, a smug little smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Well," Joy said finally, her tone dripping with mock pity, "I guess we've learned today that Rocky can take a few punches in the ring, but he sure can't handle a few tough questions on TV." The audience murmured, some gasping, others shaking their heads. But Stallone didn't flinch this time. He simply unhooked his microphone with deliberate, almost theatrical calm and set it down on the table. "You know," he began, his voice steady but low, "I came here today because I thought this was going to be a conversation about my work, my career, my journey. I thought maybe we'd talk about what it means to spend 50 years in this business, what it takes to survive in a world that eats you alive if you let it." Joy rolled her eyes. "Oh, please spare us the martyr act. You're not some poor underdog anymore, Sylvester. You're a rich man still clinging to a fairy tale that stopped being inspiring decades ago." That was it. Stallone slowly stood up. The red leather of his chair squeaked under the weight as the room collectively held its breath. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his posture, and fixed Joy with a stare so intense even the audience members in the back row could feel it. "You," he said, his voice now rising just enough to command the entire room, "don't know a damn thing about inspiring anyone. You don't know a damn thing about struggle, about sacrifice, about getting up when life beats you down. All you know how to do is sit there on your little throne of cynicism and tear other people apart because you don't have the guts to create anything yourself." Joy opened her mouth, but he cut her off with a single sharp gesture of his hand. "No, you've had your turn," he growled, his voice now carrying the full weight of decades of bottled-up fury. "You've spent this entire show trying to tear me down, mocking my work, mocking my fans, mocking me. You call that journalism? You think that makes you better than me? Makes you smarter? Makes you right?" He took a step closer to the table, his presence now towering, magnetic. The studio lights seemed to dim as the temperature in the room dropped to freezing. "You want to know what you really are, Joy?" he asked, his voice now a lethal whisper that somehow still carried to every corner of the set. Joy swallowed but didn't answer. "You're not a journalist. You're not a critic. You're not even a host. You're a vulture. You feed on other people's pain. You tear down everything good and noble just so you can feel important. But all you really are is small." The audience was stone silent now. Even the co-hosts sat frozen, their eyes wide, their hands clamped in their laps. "You think I'm here because I care what you think of me?" Stallone continued, his words slicing through the air like blades. "I'm here because I respect the audience. The people watching at home who've seen my movies, who've told me they were inspired to keep going, to keep fighting because of the stories I told. That's who I work for, not you." Joy's face was flushed with anger, but her hands trembled slightly where they rested on the table. "You sit here pretending to be the voice of the people, but you don't even listen to them," Stallone said, his voice rising now, his fury undeniable. "All you care about is being louder than everyone else, so you can hear yourself talk. But your words, they're empty. They mean nothing." He reached down, picked up the microphone he'd placed on the table, and dropped it back down again with a clack that echoed through the silent studio. "This interview," he declared, "is over." And with that, he straightened his jacket, turned on his heel, and began walking toward the studio doors. But just before he reached them, he stopped, turned back, and delivered one final devastating blow. "You call what you do journalism? You call this a platform for truth? Let me tell you what this is. A circus. A cheap circus full of clowns who don't even realize the joke is on them. You've spent your life tearing down people like me because it distracts you from what you see in the mirror. And what you see in the mirror?" He paused, his eyes locked on Joy, who now looked genuinely shaken. "Is nothing." With that, he turned back around, his broad shoulders cutting through the tension like a blade. The sound of his footsteps against the studio floor was deafening as he walked off the set and through the exit without another word. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Joy Behar sitting frozen in her chair, her face a mask of shock and fury, and the other hosts looking anywhere but at each other. The audience sat stunned, their faces a mixture of awe, discomfort, and, in some corners, quiet applause. And somewhere beyond the lights, beyond the cameras, Sylvester Stallone disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind a studio full of silence, shattered egos, and the unmistakable sense that they had just witnessed something monumental. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Was Stallone justified in finally speaking his mind and walking out? Or did Joy's tough questions simply strike too close to home? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.